The two takeaways that an employer can implement in order to retain their talent, particularly diverse talent, is first, at the organizational level, they need to examine whether they have criteria that is explicit in terms of career advancement and performance management. The second takeaway is they can really ensure that their managers are effectively trained to understand and implement those policies and practices with parity.
Companies need to demonstrate to anyone who is looking for employment at their organization in critical ways. They need to demonstrate the moment that person walks in the door that they're fully committed to diversity and inclusion for everybody. The best way to accomplish that is to make sure that you have done some critical work before that person walks through the door or clicks on your website. You need to make sure that everything that that person sees indicates to that person that you value them, their whole self. So things like who is on the walls of your office, who is in the interview panel, who are the photos, the stock photos, et cetera, that you use on your website. Because every one of those elements will tell that individual how he or she will be valued by the organization. During the interview process, companies can also highlight things that they do to make sure that they show the entire cultural value, corporate value to the employee. What organizations they support, what events do they host so that the employees can come together from all walks of life to enjoy being part of the company. The moment you do that, I think you'll have a better chance of not only attracting an employee, but retaining that employee and seeing them advance and grow and become their full potential.
I am Leah Deering, partner here at Berman Fink and Litigation Group, and we're really excited about the topic we have today. It is a little different than what we normally cover. Normally we ask you guys to come here and we tell you, scary things in the law that you have to comply with, or else you may have to call us and need our very expensive legal services. That is not really what we're here to cover today. It's the other side of the coin. It is how you can leverage the information that these two experts are about to talk to you about to really enhance your business. And that is through hiring, promoting, developing, and retaining a diverse employee talent set. So we're really excited about this topic. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. As we were talking, the few of you at the beginning of this, when I graduated law school, my class was 50% women, 50% men. And 10 years out, 2/3 of the women I graduated with weren't practicing law anymore. And when I came to Atlanta, and I practiced in Dallas for 8 years, I happened to meet Wendy, and she was doing some really exciting think tank work and trying to find what's the gap? Why is it that you have really talented people, really smart, really leaders in their field that are excelling in the first 1 to 5 years, say, of their career, and then they drop out? The company loses them. How do we reverse that? How do you retain really good talent? So I want to make sure as we get started today, we're on the same page about two really important things. We are operating from the premise that we are dealing with the most qualified people, right? We're not talking about affirmative action plans. We're not talking about giving somebody a chance. We're talking about diverse candidates that are the best in their field that you want to work in your company because they're going to give you a competitive advantage. The second thing I want everyone to know about is we're not pointing the fingers at anybody. When we talk about things you can do differently, things you can uncover about your own thinking patterns, they apply to us too. They apply to me too. There are a lot of things that I think, and I do a lot of the hiring for our law firm, that may or may not be true. They're biases. They're assumptions I make based on the experiences I've had in my life. And some of the things we hope to accomplish today are, one, that everyone in the room thinks this is as important as we do when you walk out, if you don't already. And two, you have some tools to go out and deploy in your own companies so that you are attracting, retaining, promoting, and keeping really great talent. So to do that, we have two wonderful speakers here today. The first one that I will introduce is Miss Wendy Heckelman. Wendy has a consulting company called WLH Consulting, Inc., and she helps companies do the sorts of things we're going to talk about today. She helps companies figure out how to retain, promote, really great talent in their companies, and often with a focus on women in the workforce. Jose Jimenez is also here with us today. Jose has a really interesting background. He's both been in a big corporation and also is a small business owner. And he has been specifically tasked with diversity and inclusion work for Cox Enterprises. And now he owns his own printing businesses, and he has the experience of both managing this concept in a large corporation with hundreds of employees and also in his own business. And so they both have really exciting insights to bring to you today and how to recruit and retain your diverse employees. So Wendy, I will turn it over to you first for an introduction. Thank you.
So good morning, everybody. So how many of you have ever lost an employee that you had no idea were getting ready to leave? Okay. And how many of you are having a hard time finding the right talent? Okay. So attracting and retaining talent's pretty important today. So I think what I want to share with you, so I've been doing this work for 28 years. So I'm going to date myself. So when Leah says, when she was in law school, it was 50-50 and 3/4 have left, what she's really talking about is sort of women off-ramping in the careers. About 25 years ago, I started doing some work looking at the retention of high-performing talent and why they were leaving. And we're not talking about average talent. We're talking about exceptional talent that voluntarily left. And through our work, we built what was known as a retention predictor model. And when we think about retention, it operates on 3 levels. And I have some handouts that I'll share with you. But there are 3 elements of factors, and one is really organizational factors. And those are things like corporate culture, talent management practices, how are you in terms of total rewards, as well as flexible work arrangements, right? So that was the organizational level of retention. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then there's the manager and employee relationship, which, by the way, is the single one reason people leave their bosses. They don't usually leave their organizations. And we'll talk. And people who stay for their boss is because they have a positive work environment. They have a place that they've got coaching and supervision, and where they think they're effectively managed from a performance management perspective. And then there's sort of the individual level, which is career advancement, meaningful work. So somebody's got to really love what they do, because if not, they tend to leave. That's the second most important reason why people leave. And then work-life balance. So fast forward 20 years later, post 2008, right? Because we had a war for talent, then we didn't for a while. And the work that Leah's talking about is I took a look about 3-4 years ago, looking at women in particular, to understand what was different about women who left and then people of color. And what we found was some differences, right? In the original model, boss was the most important reason why people left, and meaningful work was the second. When you layer in women, what we were finding is corporate culture was really important as to why people stayed or left. And why this is important is everybody here who's an owner has the opportunity to really shape their culture. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means. So sometimes at an organizational level, women need to understand what are the criteria for performance management. What are the reasons around career advancement, right? It's got to be explicit. A lot of times a man will say, there's a new position. Oh, okay, I can do it, and they may not really be ready. Women tend to wait until they tick all the boxes. So you're smiling. Does that seem to make sense? Yeah. Okay. So what I found in this research that we did was that parity in terms of what you say, criteria being clear around performance management, and work-life balance was really important. So if an organization had a flexible work arrangement policy, but the manager didn't interpret it fairly, guess what happened? So I think from a leadership perspective as an owner, you can do a lot in terms of proactively mitigating risk for retention loss by just some of the elements around culture and ensuring that there's meaningful work and there are opportunities really for advancement that are seen as fair. The last piece I'll say, which is a little provocative, is we have in a lot of organizations in America still today where there's unconscious bias. And it's called second generation unconscious bias. So I won't give you the details, but essentially, since some of these organizations have been grown up as primarily male, they have practices, that are below the surface that are actually prejudice. So what does that mean? Oh, I won't ask Tiana for an opportunity because she's going to have babies and she's going to leave. So there she doesn't get the opportunity. There's an a priori assumption. So I think that if you're going to take anything away from sort of this opening, so that you can proactively do something at the organizational culture level. 2, you can ensure that managers check in with their folks to re-recruit them and make sure that their needs around meaningful work and career opportunity are there. And then at the individual level, you're ensuring that you have a sense as to what flexibility is required. So I think retention operates on a few levels, and there's a lot that can be done.
Thank you, Wendy. Jose?
Good morning, everybody. How are you guys doing? How many of these kinds of talks on diversity have you attended before? A couple? Anybody else? A few? Look around this room a little bit, please. What's remarkable about this room?
Pretty monotone.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not saying that there is anything wrong with that, but I wanted you guys to kind of look around a little bit about the people we've chosen to surround ourselves with today. So this is very different from when I first got a taste of diversity and inclusion. I was working for Cox Communications. I was in their law and policy department, doing crazy stuff like telling the FCC what to do with telecommunications policy. That's fun. When the company decided to found a diversity and inclusion committee for the Atlanta-based employees of Cox. And my leader at the time nominated me. And we sat around a room and a big table and all of the departments across the company, and there's probably 7,000 Cox employees in that campus, all sent somebody. And then we all introduced ourselves. There were probably about 15 of us. And at the end, I was the last one. And of course, as I am sometimes wont to do, I will say what's in my mind. and I say, well, it's great meeting you all, but where is the straight white male? So it's interesting. So I've gone from that experience where there was one significant stakeholder missing to this experience where, by my estimation, there are some significant stakeholders missing. So when Wendy speaks about, and we will all talk about culture, when we all talk about what it means to attract somebody of talent, what it means to retain somebody of talent, think about what it means when that person walks into your organization, into a room that looks like this, and they are the only. What happens then? What happens when you're the only? So you either have to have some inner strength, and some of you have been the only, particularly the women. Some inner strength that tells you, you know what, I belong here, even though I don't look like anybody else here. Or this is not the place for me. So how do you, as responsible leaders of your organizations, make sure that their sense of belonging is with the first as opposed to the second? And I suspect we'll get a little bit into that dialogue.
Okay. So I missed a very important announcement at the beginning of this that I
We get a prize?
I promise. There are no prizes. There are no prizes. Well, you know what? This could qualify as a prize. We have parking tickets for you guys to get out of the parking garage. And Jill has those, and I think most of you got them when you walked in. But if you didn't, Jill will hand those out as you leave today. And also we have continuing education certificates for those of you that need them. And this would qualify for, and she has those as well. So feel free to pick those up as you head out. So the next part of our talk is going to be a little Q&A. And for those of you that have come to these before, you know that we are a dynamic and interactive presentation series here. So feel free to raise your hands if you have any questions and chime in if you have experiences that you think will lend to the discussion. So I'm going to start off with is sort of a softball, right? Let's talk about the business case a little bit. Why should this be the most important thing or a very important thing that every business is thinking about as it relates to their bottom line? How are having a diverse talent pool, how is that contributing to the success and profitability of the companies? And Wendy, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Okay, so there's a lot of data to suggest this, and it looks in two ways. Why? Because if you're interfacing with others, they like to have some diversity, right? So if you're sitting here in a bunch of all white men, middle-aged white men, and you're coming to organizations that are a little bit more dynamic, it's not really it can hurt in terms of your selection process for working with them, right? We also know that there's some data that organizations that have diversity of thought and have women tend to have about 35% more creative problem solving, right? So there's a whole lot of data that suggests that diversity of thought matters. And I mean, when we talk about diversity here, it's not only women, people of color, other minorities. Diversity can be position of thought, right? Core beliefs, because you can have a room of all unisex and have lots of diversity. But I think it matters a lot from a business perspective. And there's data suggests you get better performance and better ROI.
Wendy, I think that there's some statistics on public companies and their boards being diverse and how that impacts. Can you speak briefly to that?
Yeah, right. So there is a perception that of boards that have more diversity, there's a third in terms of better corporate culture, visibility, as well as profitability. I mean, so there's a good business case for having, attracting, retaining, and growing talent. I mean, because people are off-ramping when you tend to lose women and people of minority in 3 to 5 years, right? They may stay for a little while, but they off-ramp because they're not seeing opportunities for advancement and clear criteria.
Jose, I know that was one of the challenges you faced at Cox, was how do you measure these sort of intangibles? Could you speak to that for a minute?
Sure. So first, I mean, there is a nice warm fuzzy feeling around diversity, right? And I think organizations that don't get beyond that warm fuzzy feeling to understand the business affecting element of diversity face a huge risk, because what they're doing, I think, is throwing good money after bad. They may be sponsoring external organizations that make their employees feel good, or they may be creating cultural events. Those are great visual things, and I'm not saying that those aren't critical, but until you get down and understand the direct correlation between having a diverse population and the business value, it's going to be a struggle, and it's going to be subject to whoever comes after you leading this thing. What is their warm fuzzy spot? So you've got to get down in, and it is hard to do, which is what Leah was referring to. There are some things that are easy to pick out. I think many of you raised your hands when you said that you lost an employee, right? How expensive is it to replace somebody? $10,000. I'm sorry?
$12,000, I think is a statistic.
It's a statistic.
It's actually it's way more. So it's actually 400%. When you look at knowledge and skilled workers, it's almost 400%, plus the fact of when somebody's leaving, their productivity starts to decline. Then you bring somebody on board, okay, and then you need to take a time for them to perform. And so it's really usually sometimes as much as an 18-month curve, right, to get somebody back and fully functioning. So you have to put those costs. So you spend a lot of money to bring somebody in. It's equally important to retain them because it's actually more disruptive and it costs you a lot more money.
So the challenge, of course, is when somebody leaves, how do you know that that person left? Because the culture of the organization did not make them feel wanted and included. That's hard to do. Organizations do a fairly poor job of doing exit interviews to try and understand what is it that made somebody go. But given the downside of losing future employees, I would argue that one kind of relatively easy thing that you need to get better at is understanding. I mean, once somebody has left or is about to leave, you may not be able to solve that person's issue. But if you don't understand that that person is leaving because your organization is not culturally inclusive, then you are going to repeat that again and again and again. So that investment to understand why and to understand how you can fix it is critical. There's other significant downsides. Leah started the talk this morning saying you are always here listening to, you gotta do X, Y, and Z, otherwise you're going to lose money because of some regulation. Ask Coca-Cola how expensive it is when you don't have a culture of inclusivity. You are familiar with the Coca-Cola lawsuit, right? No? Well, yeah. I mean, a bunch of, I believe, African American middle managers successfully sued that company for hundreds of millions of dollars because they proved that their hiring and promoting practices were discriminatory. So there is a significant downside on the legal side, but we talked about two downsides. Wendy began to speak a little bit about the upside. So I'll be another blunt. So homogeneous teams work faster. That's a fact too. If you don't acknowledge the fact that, there are some things that people who are like-minded and look like each other can take on a problem and move it along faster, then you don't understand human nature. But heterogeneous teams, diverse teams, get more done in diverse ways and long-term bring more value to the organization. So the challenge each of you have is, okay, so are you willing to live with that short-term pain of getting the right people in who are diverse? Because the long-term payoff to you and to your bottom line will be much, much higher. So.
And sticking on the business case portion just for one more minute, how are client and vendor relationships playing in a role in companies' need and desire to push for a more diverse workforce?
That's the part that I had started to say. People want from a professional services perspective, they want to have like-minded, like types of people, right? So it impacts decisions. If you have two agencies making pitches, and one's completely homogeneous and one is more diverse, you see over and over again the more diverse team gets it because of diversity of thought. And I think what Jose's talking about, the better rounded decision making.
So, first it is a fact of life that if you want to do work for a large organization these days, and the large organization has a diversity group within it, they are going to pay a whole lot of attention to the supply chain of their business. I know this. I ran diversity and inclusion for Cox Enterprises. And having a diverse supply chain is critical. And often it goes to the second stage, meaning they're not only looking to see who is at the table, but they want to know who is at your table. So think about that for the small businesses in the room. So it may be that you are in the room and you are killing it with the presentation to a UPS or a Mercedes-Benz or whomever you're trying to impress with your services. And they're going to ask you, well, that's great. Who is at your table? What is the makeup of your employee base? And that is happening more and more frequently. So talk about a direct impact on the bottom line, because if you don't win someone's business because you are not able to articulate how you are supporting a diverse population, that's on you.
And it sounds like a lot of it is looking for a matching culture,
Yeah.
right? Because if your client or the vendor you're working with has a diverse workforce, they've sustained and created a culture that promotes that, and they're looking for partners in the market. Go ahead.
And Leah, I apologize because you also asked about the market, your clients. So we were talking about this when we were prepping for this, when it was just Leah and me. How many of you are familiar with the Dove commercial controversy of, when was that?
Dove, it was...
about 2 years ago, because you looked it up while we were talking.
Yeah, it was the commercial where they were talking about using the soap, and they had female actors, and they were changing, and when they would talk about getting clean, an African-American woman was the first image, and she'd take off her shirt, and then there was a Caucasian woman. And it got through multiple levels of people reviewing that commercial, and it actually made it to TV and print. Yeah. Before people realized that sent a really poor message to a community they were trying to market to.
Because think about that. I mean, how, this, so what that told me, well, what I can infer from Dove going out to the market with that kind of advertising, talk about affecting your client base. Because they probably angered just about everybody. They anger the black population and they anger the white population. Because if you care and you look at this, and the message is, oh, if you take a bar of soap and you take it to a black skin and you become a white female, what is that? How does that? But that's exactly what they showed. I mean, you can look it up. I'm sure it's on YouTube somewhere. You saw it, right? I mean, it is incredible to me that in today's United States, that thing made it through. But it is also credible. Because my suspicion is that as it went through the food chain of marketing a Dove, there was not one, just like there is anyone in this room, frankly, of a black person who said, that's not going to work. No one stopped it because that team, that management structure did not have the person to police it. So that's a risk you run as well as you try to sell your services. Will you do a misstep because you don't understand the people you're trying to serve?
So, no one that I interact with on a regular basis is trying to make these mistakes, right? We all want the best talent, we all want the best folks in our workforce, and we want to keep them. And our discussions lead me to believe a lot of the missteps are a result of unconscious bias.
Absolutely.
And there's a great quote. It's a book I've been reading. It's really interesting if you can get through really dense, small type. But it's the psychology behind some of how our brains work. But the quote says, and let me see if I can get it here right. We can be blind to the obvious, and we are also blind to our blindness. We don't know it. It's not an active part of how we're making decisions when we self-select folks that look, talk, worship, think like us. And an example I'll give to everyone is, Ken and I do a lot of training on HR. And, I guess a year and a half, 2 years ago, I was doing the talking circuit on the Me Too movement and helping people get ahead of that issue. And one of the things I asked an audience was how they managed the promotion of junior level folks in the banking system to the more senior management levels. And they said, well, the managers pick them, right? And I said, well, what do your managers look like? And they said, well, they're, all like 30 to 45-year-old white guys. And I said, so your 30 to 45-year-old white guys are picking the people that are coming up through the process. I said, and they all kind of look the same, don't they? And it was really interesting because it was so obvious, but it also caught everyone in the room off guard that, wait a minute, do we need to have a self-selection program or some other sort of written criteria in place that are helping candidates that may not be hanging out on the golf course with the managers or in social settings that are created for a subset of population because they have the same interests, so that these diverse candidates can come up through these banking systems. And it was a really interesting problem. So I guess my question to you is, how does unconscious bias play a role, and what can we do to overcome things that are happening in our subconscious?
All right, so I want to pack your question because there's a couple elements. First of all, unconscious bias is just that. It's unconscious, right? I think nobody walks around saying, I want to not be inclusive. We have people that are prejudiced, okay? Let's state it. This is the South, and some of it sits behind below the surface. But unconscious bias is really lack of awareness. And some of the work practices that have happened in terms of corporate cultures, because they were predominantly men, they're predominantly white men over the years, and some of those occur to sort of what the culture is and the culture beliefs. But what can you do? I think what Leah was starting to talk about, which is really what our research found, is at the corporate level, parity and clearly identified criteria for promotion, advancement, for performance management make a big difference. Because then it's not, oh, well, I'm hanging out, I'm being sponsored, and we're going to talk, let me talk about mentorship and sponsorship for a minute here. Being sponsored by somebody, and then I get the opportunity. So women and people, diverse talent, if the criteria is clear, then it sets more of a level playing field, okay? Now I want to talk a second about what Leah's comment as well on the golf course. So we know the difference between mentoring and sponsoring? Anybody? Okay.
Mentoring is kind of more generally informal, the way that it starts and kind of looking for that growth someone that you maybe see yourself in. Sponsoring, I think, is more from the top down, where someone chooses to kind of lift up someone junior to put them in the spotlight.
Okay, that's pretty close. So how I would characterize is mentors, and we've all had mentors at different points in our life. And actually what we learn is women do best with having both male and female mentors, right? Mentoring somebody who's gonna guide you, help you kind of grow your career. Sponsors act. I'm gonna advocate for you. Jose on my team is great. I think he's ready for that next promotion, right? Tiana is fabulous. I think she should take a shot. Well, what we find is women, particularly, have sometimes, they're over-mentored and under-sponsored. And then you layer in what happened with Me Too, became the spotlight, it's been going on for a long time. And now you have males that used to sometimes mentor and sponsor women have pulled back a little bit because of some concerns. So what can you do? You need to be really clear at the organizational level about your policies for promotion, for flexible work life, and for and criteria for advancement, right? So your performance management's got to be explicit. And the other thing you can do is really educate and think about how do you identify that high-performing talent and grow it and nurture it and sponsor it. Just don't mentor it. Those are things you can do.
Jose?
So I feel like I'm about to depress you guys a little bit, but hopefully then I'll encourage you, okay? So unconscious bias. So the research, as Wendy already noted, we all have them. First, do you know why we have them? Do you have any idea? Anybody has a theory?
It's necessary to operate. Our minds work real fast.
Irving
We
Goffman in
have-
groups and out groups.
Yeah. Well, yeah, some of that is true. But the fact is, we are recipients every day of messaging, intentional and unintentional, that actually fortify our internal biases. The research frankly shows that, while there are clear biases among the white population against, unconscious bias, we'll talk about conscious versus unconscious in a minute, toward black people generally. Black people have unconscious against black people. How do you explain that? We live in a society where messaging about how we see each other, how we see the other, are constantly reinforced. It begins from an early age and it continues. And part of the challenge that raises is that it is really, really difficult for the average human being, let alone a corporation, to tackle that and change it. That's the depressing part, right? We understand, that this is something that we're gonna have to kind of find a way around. But there are some things, there's some stuff going on today that is giving us some insights into how you can bend the curve. Now, have you ever heard of what happened with America's Symphony Orchestras? No? So in the 1970s, 95% of the talent in an orchestra pit was a straight white male. Does that surprise you? So the symphony, I don't know which one, I forget which one, decided, you know what, we've got to try and bend this curve a little. And they come up with a brilliant idea, a blind audition. So today's symphonies, when they are auditioning somebody, that person walks on stage behind a white curtain. The people judging the talent sit in the audience, and they only have one thing to judge. What is that? The sound. Do you know what is the makeup of today's symphonies in the United States? They began to reflect much more of the population of our country. So what did they do? Why was that important? It's obvious, right? But somebody? What did the white sheet do? You drop that curtain, and all your brain is able to use to determine who gets on that pit going forward, or on that stage going forward, is a talent. So I've done a little bit of work like this with some nonprofits in Atlanta. What I told them after the training was, you're not going to change you. And in fact, research also shows that the greatest harm done to diversity is done by well-intentioned people. We know the tiki torchers, the tiki torch marchers. We know who they are, and we can condemn them. They are bad people. But the greatest damage, hear me, done to diversity and inclusion, to diverse employees, is not done by them. It's done by us. Until we have the courage to say, the processes that we have, inside of them, there are biases. And there are tools out there, like there are engines today that will strip the names of candidates from resumes. Because we know that the name of a candidate, my name, Jose Manuel Jimenez, that name will make it more difficult for me to get a job from any of you. So there are engines today that take that name out so that all you see is the CV. They even go in and strip out certain keywords from CVs to try and make it so that it's only the talent that shows. I just encourage you to look at tools like that to improve your acquisition of talent.
So the example you raise is an interesting one because we see it so much in TV right now and in the media. I don't know if anybody heard, but there's an article that just came out where they've talked about how we value women's art versus men's art. And there's a museum that came out and said, in the next 12 months, we're only buying pieces from women artists because we've done these studies and we realize how underrepresented women are in museums. And they went and did a huge study of looking at Sotheby's and all the sales of art and showed that if you put the name with the piece and it's a female name, it generates 40% less than male art that's been judged similarly by critics, right? That we attach more value to art that's been produced by men. But then we also have The Masked Singer. We have, all these talent shows and TV shows that are picking folks to go through based on blind auditions, just like what you mentioned with the symphony orchestra. And so there's definitely something that's catching wind out there, that there is something about how we see people that is impacting our decisions with respect to their value. And so, my next question is we try to overcome that by putting in place criteria that we think is bias neutral, right? So in my shoes, when I'm hiring law students, I'm looking at where they went to school, what their grades were, things that I think are pretty unbiased, right? I'm going to apply it across. I'm not going to look at that name at the top. But, I think there's a layer behind that, which is how the pipeline is going into the schools that maybe I'm hiring from. So can you talk a little bit about sort of the pipeline of candidates and how candidates are coming to us and how we can more proactively find that top tier talent?
Yeah, go. You want to take that, or you want me to?
Well, I like batting second here. It's good.
So you're talking about spreading your eyes, right? From an attraction, okay? So
Right.
I'm really over once you get them in the door, I can tell you how to make sure you keep them and what policies you can put in place. Mm-hmm. But I do think that we tend to recruit, and there's some recruitment experts here, from places that we're comfortable with and that we know, opposed to opening. If you're coming from the Ivy Leagues, right, top Ivy schools, everybody's recruiting on that campus. And that criteria, there is a war for talent for knowledge and skilled workers. How many of you have got jobs and you're having a hard time filling them, right? Yeah. Right? Right? And I wonder, are you opening your lens as wide as it can be to find non-traditional ways in which to hire talent?
We like to think so.
So what do you really think?
No, I don't know of any other way that we can try to attract talent. We have positions we need to fill. We're having trouble filling them, finding people that are qualified for those positions.
Right.
So if there are suggestions, we are absolutely open to that.
Well, one is that you have an organization that the cultural practices, the corporate policies are clear. I'm going to keep going back to transparency. Mm-hmm. People that are looking for jobs want to understand where's their career growth, right? Am I going to like my boss? Really pretty important. Am I going to be given meaningful work? Really important. But women and diverse candidates, what are my opportunities for advancement? How clear is the criteria, and what meaningful training and growth are you going to give me, right? And if you can't talk about criteria and growth opportunities and what you're going to do to nurture somebody, they're going to go someplace else.
It's funny because we interviewed a candidate yesterday, and the candidate mentioned personal growth like 6 times during the course of the interview. And I actually was a little bit put off by that. It sounded like the candidate was more interested in their personal growth. But from what you're saying, that sounds like that's something that is important and that we have to listen to.
It is important. People come to organizations so they can grow and develop, right? Lifelong employees are far and few between today, right? I'm not talking about the millennial who comes in and says, I need X amount of days off and I need flexible work and I need da-da-da-da. That's a non-starter, right? I run a management consulting firm, right? You have to suit up when you go to your clients. You can't have 5 earrings sitting in your ears, okay? You know, there's certain appropriateness. But there are people that will say, what are you going to give me to help me grow and develop my skills and abilities? So having a career growth and training and development available is really important. So, you know, you need to be able to have those things. People are going to say, you know, what does the performance management process look like? What's my criteria for advancement? Those are really important, and they're especially important for women and minorities. So yes, it should be important.
So where are you going to get your talent?
Leah? She's the front line.
No, so, you know, I'll answer that for you, because there's a joke, not everyone's here today, or I'd have them all stand up, but I have worked a lot with the firm on hiring, and if the people that I have hired stood up, they're like 5'4" to 5'8" brunettes that you know, look a lot like me, and I joke all the time, like, I'm working hard to create a diverse workforce in our firm, and then I look at who I hired and I'm like, I've just done the exact same thing that everybody else is, you know, that I complained about. I didn't complain about, but you know, we're trying to avoid, which is trying to avoid a bunch of people that look and think like me. And I've recognized through that hiring process that you know, it's a natural thing. You hire people that you're comfortable with and that you think are similar to you, because you think that they're going to be a good fit.
And that's a prior bias.
And it's so important to have real criteria, even for me, who's up here standing at the front of the room, to help me get beyond that. So we, to avoid sort of this foregone conclusion that I'm going to hire another brunette that's between 5'4" and 5'8", you know, have done some things to expand the schools we're looking at, to go a little deeper in the classes, to get some maybe candidates that didn't have the same support system behind them to get through high school and college and not have to work, and so maybe their grades aren't as excellent as some of the other candidates, but you know, they still show that they've got drive and attention to detail and all the things we need in great lawyers. And so we're trying to expand that net of the kind of candidate we look at to hopefully get a more diverse but also very competent candidate in the office.
Well, I mean, I think that you answered the question in the way I hope you would, you know, expanding the net. So I'll use a different example to tell you, I mean, so organizations struggle with this in a lot of different ways. So how many of you are familiar with Leadership Atlanta? So I'm an alum of the program. And recently, I've been in discussions about the fact that that program has a gross underrepresentation of Latino leaders from the area. In the current class, the class of 2020, I was a co-chair of the race program for Leadership Atlanta. That was an amazing privilege, believe me. So we got into this really deep talks about why is it that the current class of about 80 people has more women named Jessica than Latinos. That's a fact. Think about that. In an area where we already have one county that has, as a percentage, more Latinos than any of the other ethnic minorities in Gwinnett. How is it that a program as amazing, I think, as Leadership Atlanta ends up with a class that is so just not representative of who we have out there in the region? And one of the members of the people in the staff of Leadership Atlanta said, well, we just can't find any. So how many of you have heard that statement before when you're trying to find talent of a particular population. You just need to go and expand your net. Now, that doesn't mean I would encourage you to never think about hiring people that you don't think can do the job, because that will lead to that employee going, and it'll cost you, how much money was it to replace?
400%.
Thank you. So you don't want to do that. But you owe it to yourselves and your organizations to go to the HBCUs, to go to the schools in the Southwest United States for Latino representation, to go to the schools in California if you're looking for more Asian candidates. Because if they're not here, they're over there. And that's just a flight across the country. Go do it.
So you're talking about expanding sort of your casting the net.
Yes.
Once you've cast the net, though, you really need a structured interview process, right? Approved questions, criteria around screening, because if you're just doing it off the hook, off the cuff, I'm going to do what Leo's saying. I'm going to hire people that a priori, unconscious, I think this is going to be a good candidate. This person I understand, I've got a good sense. When you use a structured interview process that you've thought about the criteria for hiring and ask the kind of questions and sort of score it, you tend to level set your hiring practice and get good talent. Then keeping them is really where the real trick is. So once you get them in, if you're not keeping them and growing them, you've spent a lot of time bringing people, you end up on this treadmill, trying to find the talent, trying to keep it, and understanding why you've just invested 5 years in this really talented woman, but you couldn't give any flexibility where it was job available, and they off ramp. They go set up their own business, they go to a place that's gonna have some flexibility, so flexible work arrangements. I'm not talking about working from home, or sitting in Starbucks. I'm talking about having flexibility that works within your organization. Maybe you're letting somebody get in a late start so they get their kid off to school, or they leave at a certain hour, they do the shuttle, and then they're back to working at their computer. You've talked about flexible work arrangements. They make a difference.
Huge. So what I have here is sort of 3 takeaways we've come through so far. One is we've got to expand the net of where we're finding candidates to where there is actually a pool of candidates that maybe aren't homogenous. And then 2, we have to adjust to some degree how we interview candidates that maybe have a different value set and a different need structure than the interviewer, and to level set that to make sure we're evaluating these candidates on a fair basis. And that once you get these people in the door, flexible work arrangements, and the way you've talked about it, Wendy, is very important. But let's give the audience some more tangible tools, right? You guys, you've done it in Cox. This is what you do for a living, is you come into companies and you show them how to implement things to retain and grow their talent. Can you each give us just a couple of very tangible ways you suggest or you have seen it work that they can implement when they walk out the door today?
Yeah. First of all, I think we talk about really re-recruiting talent, right? I use the term re-recruitment. When you've got somebody in the door, you want to understand what's important to them. Where do they want to go from a career growth, and then helping to shepherd that. When we think about retention, it lives on 3 levels: organizationally, so what you can do around criteria, parity. But managers are really critical because they're the interpreters of the policy. So you could have a policy that says, this is how we manage performance. This is what flexible work arrangements look like. This is what the total rewards, because by the way, same jobs, women are often underpaid by what percentage, Alea?
Oh goodness, what, 30 to 40%?
30 to 40%, same job, okay? So managers really need to be educated as to really the factors, and then purposely retain and grow their talent. And they need to grow all their talent. The difference is, this is not a male-female, diversity, white issue. This is, you bring somebody in, you want to retain them, better have a good relationship with their boss, because they're going to leave otherwise. You need to have a culture that's got criteria that's clear. And you need to pay attention to their individual needs and adjust and flex as you can. That does not mean not to manage performance, but development matters, and you've got to provide opportunities.
So I'll get a little bit, so I mentioned, or I started the conversation about talking about the only, right? So suppose that you work or own an organization today that doesn't have a lot of diversity. You take the steps that Wendy talked about bring a talented person in for an interview, what does that person see when he or she walks through that door of your building? Do they see a place where they might belong? Are there cues to your culture in the way you decorate? I'm not kidding. This is important stuff. This can affect, and particularly the younger, the millennial generation and younger, they pay attention to this. You know, what are they looking at? Is there somebody in the interview panel who looks like me? Good luck. If they're going to be the only, you may not have that, but at least you need to be aware of that and find a way to perhaps even acknowledge that. So you've got to talk about and think about what is it that happens when that person walks through the door to even have the first conversation with you. That environment is critical. Yes?
You said millennial, so I feel like I have to speak up. Hi, everybody. Just to add what you say visually, your website. Like, as a millennial, first thing I ever do when I want to go in for an interview is I'm going to look at your website. So just like he said, visual cues, what are people seeing in your office? What do people see on your website? Like, in all your blog posts, are the pictures of people the same type of people? That's really important.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, those are more tactical things that frankly, if you don't do those right, then you can cast as wide a net as you want. You can go and improve your processes. You are not going to get the right result.
Jose, I mean, let's say that we're trying, but we're not there yet. And we genuinely want to be there. If we have that diverse candidate walk in the door for an interview, what are some tangible suggestions that you can give us to help convince that candidate that we do have a culture and that we will be a good place to grow their career? And we're not only going to mentor, but we're going to sponsor. How do you make that sales pitch to the candidate?
So first, I mean, I would make this sales pitch to every candidate, not just a diverse candidate. You know, what is it that you do as an organization to show every individual that he or she is valued? I mentioned earlier that a lot of the organizations stay up here when it comes to diversity and inclusion. They'll have the cultural event. They'll sponsor an important organization like, I don't know, the Human Rights Campaign. So they'll do things like that, and I kind of dismissed it. But the fact is, if you're spending your money in making those investments, I will make sure that I share with the candidate, this is how we give our employees a room to be exactly who they are and show up every day. And these are ways in which we show that. This is how we show our company values. We sponsor organizations that value diversity, inclusion, and the environment, and whatever is important to you, but there are ways in which you can indicate beyond, the important critical cosmetics of what the employee or candidate sees when they walk through the door or click on a website. But there are ways in which you can talk to that person about, and let me tell you that you're not coming here just to get a paycheck. We're going to look at you as your entire being to enable you to show up in that room completely. And even though you might be the only, we're also not going to look to you to tell the story of your people. Okay? Be careful with, you are the crazy great Cuban. What happened with that Elian Gonzalez thing? That would be me. I got that question probably about 100 times. Do you guys know what the Elian Gonzalez thing was?
Yes.
Do you know? I mean, it was incredible. It was like, okay, I guess I can speak for not only South Florida, but the island of 11 million where I was born. But those questions tire. That's more about retention than acquisition. Yep. But those questions tire. So be careful with, particularly when you have attracted the only and you're working to get more in, do not hire the only because you'll leave.
Yeah, I'd like to add a thought that I try to work with my clients on hiring better, whether it's a diverse candidate or a person like me, is most CEOs, business owners should be differentiating between their A, B, and C players. You should only have A players interviewing people because they're self-confident, they're engaged, they're going to send the right message. The B and C players, and we could talk about what to do with them later, but they're going to be threatened by a really good candidate. They're going to ask questions that are more combative, and they're going to not want that. So that's another thing, and I think a diverse candidate is gonna see that engagement, they're gonna see the bright people that have been there for a while, that are really excited about their job, and that's gonna help sell them too.
I want to ask, how many of you have trained your managers on good managerial practices, retention of talent? Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's an area, that's an easy, tactical to do, right? Brief them, make them aware, what are the factors about retention of talent? What's your role as a manager in growing, supporting performance management? When I talk about development, and Tiana's heard me say this a million times, development, I own my own personal development 100%. But you as my boss have 100% responsibility for supporting my development. So you come to this, anybody that you bring in, you want to get them performing in their role, but you want to understand what their career growth is and what their next opportunity is to grow and help develop them. So I think if you haven't brought your managers together and talked a little bit about unconscious bias, what really matters for retention and things that they can do, that's a good first step.
Well, thank you to both of you for coming and speaking today.
It's a pleasure.
We appreciate you, and thank you guys all for coming. It's always a pleasure to host you. Have a great day.